Contacted by email, so that's what.
We're just gonna get started. All right, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Kimberly Bitts, and I am the Knowledge Mobilization Lead here at the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. And today we're presenting the second of our two-part online series, Running on Empty, answering your questions about fatigue and burnout among first responders and other public safety personnel. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here and take a moment to thank Kara Vincent and Carrie Lynn Harris, who are our knowledge translation specialists on our team, for helping pull together this incredible panel. I think it's going to be a wonderful discussion today. So we'll start with a land acknowledgement. So CIPCERT would like to acknowledge the importance of the land that we each reside upon. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in honoring relationships between nations while improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people that call our nation home. Please join us in considering how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So let's have a bit of quick housekeeping. So please note that in our session today, your microphones and cameras are off and muted, so you will be in listening mode so that we can limit some of the background noise. Their session is being recorded, and you will receive a link in your email once the recording is available to view. Please use the question box to answer or to ask questions throughout the presentation, and I will try to keep up with those questions. I do have a list of questions here as well that we will start with. The event is being presented in English, and you have the option of simultaneous captions or audio translation as well. So hopefully that will help you out. I think that is everything on there. So I would love to take a moment to introduce all of our panelists to you today. So we'll start with Mark Davies. Mark is a registered psychologist with an extensive experience in the areas of trauma, exposure, building individual and family resilience, communicating about mental health in the workplace, and then facilitating the critical incident stress management debriefing. You previously worked with the Delta Police Service. Matt Grenier is the Deputy Chief of Quality Improvement and Professional Standards for the County of Renfrew Paramedic Service. Prior to this, he was Commander of Professional Development and has been a paramedic for over 20 years. Matt holds a master's degree in leadership from Royal Roads University in Victoria. Mike Harnett is the president of Solaris Fatigue Management. He is a specialist in optimizing worker health, safety, and performance utilizing a systems approach. With over 30 years of experience, she is highly regarded as a subject matter expert on the science of fatigue and risk management principles. Charles Samuels is Medical Director of the Centre for Sleep and Human Performance in Calgary, Alberta. Clinical Assistant Professor in the University of Calgary Faculty of Medicine and Adjunct Professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology. He is board certified in sleep medicine with the American Board of Sleep Medicine. Amin Yazdani is the Executive Director of the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness, and Performance at Conestoga College. He's the Adjunct Associate Professor at the University of Waterloo and the Chair of Research Ethics Committee, and Adjunct Faculty at Pacific Coast University for Workplace Health Sciences and is a Certified Safety Professional. Marcus Young is the Director of Research at the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness, and Performance. Marcus holds a PhD and Master's of Science in Kinesiology from the University of Waterloo and a Bachelor of Science from Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, and is a board-certified professional ergonomist. As an occupational therapist by trade, that's 2 thumbs up for me to the professional ergonomist. That's great. Wonderful panel, and I really am excited to welcome you all here today for this wonderful discussion. So we're going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes in a moderated round of questions. In our previous conversation, we heard detailed presentation about fatigue and burnout in paramedics in particular. And all our attendees today span a really broad range of public safety personnel. This includes firefighters, ground search and rescue, and many others. So I'd like to start perhaps with Dr. Yazdani, Dr. Young, and Mr. Grenier to say a few words about the wider applicability of the research findings that were presented in that initial presentation, how they can be applied to the broader range of public safety personnel.
Great. Maybe I'll start first, and I think Amin and Matthew will have their input. So I think we're pretty fortunate to be part of that technical committee for the CSA standard on fatigue risk management for first responders. Actually, Mike was also part of that committee too. When we were developing that fatigue risk management standard, we did focus on paramedics, police, and fire. And the evidence that supported the development of the standard was based off of systematic reviews that reflected that objective. So we identified the current state of the art research evidence of the research studies conducted within each of these 3 important sectors. But we did take a pragmatic approach to understand and define what fatigue is and what it might mean to different work populations. So it was quite interesting, even in our technical committee meetings and even with discussions with different sectors, if we were to ask the workers and management their perspective on fatigue and their definitions, we tend to get varied answers. So there's also an interesting finding here that when you view fatigue risk management systems across industries, the focus and the perspective on fatigue does change according to the sector. There was this interesting panel discussion published by the Journal of Human Factors that discusses the effect of job characteristics and variability work populations on why fatigue, for instance, in manufacturing was largely related to physical demands and hence physical fatigue, but in transportation, aviation, and other safety critical industries, they were largely related to sleep and shift work. But we did take this pragmatic view of fatigue, and we did define fatigue as this multidimensional phenomenon that's related to work, workload, and personal and environmental factors. And as we know, fatigue is experienced by everyone, no matter job or sector. So there is a level of applicability of the standard to other PSP occupations. But we do realize that although there could be a level of applicability across PSP or occupations, I think we should also be reminded that there could be job-specific nuances that may contribute to PSP fatigue. So basically, from my vantage point, we did take a pragmatic point or viewpoint on what fatigue is. And I think there's a level of application to other jobs and sectors within paramedic PSP occupations. But I think there could be job-specific nuances that we might have to consider that in particular, the types of factors that are unique to those jobs and circumstances.
Matt or Dr. Yazdani, would you like to add to that?
Sure, I can start, and I'm sure that Matthew will be jumping as well. I just want to kind of highlight the what Dr. Young discussed around some general approaches we can take, but also highlight the sector-specific, job-specific notion of this, as we have been utilizing wearable sensors to collect data, Canadian data, when it comes to the exposure, when it comes to fatigue, when it comes to sleep behavior. We came to realize that the type of intervention, the type of task being performed by paramedics, and again later on we hope to be able to look at other occupations within the public safety personnel. We see that that has a significant impact on sleep behavior. Per se in this case. So, having a more integrated approach when it comes to fatigue is essential. There are a lot of transferable, I would say, practices that could be applied across the board, specifically on the organizational aspect of it. We have discussed that extensively when we were developing fatigue risk management system, but I believe there is this significant need of job-specific, sector-specific data that could potentially inform more evidence-informed practices. Then we can be more proactive. We can create predictive models based on the Canadian job-specific data, given that we now have the technology that can help us do better when it comes to collecting objective and primary data. And I think the combination of the approaches on the organizational side and the management side of things, and a more general approach that we can take in implementing those across different services, I think that could be an important. But I think I would like to really highlight that objective data, looking at each occupation, each job in isolation, and then kind of complement that management framework, I think would be very important in being proactive, rather than focusing on just treatment or reactive approaches. We're working with Matthew and the team to develop some predictive model for them to creation of a dashboard based on their own data, and then be able to kind of really provide resources for management to make informed decisions. So I just want to hand it over to Matthew to see if he wants to complement what I was talking about, or highlight from a perspective of a service how the data and how this approach could potentially help services.
Yeah, no, thank you, Amin. And I don't have left to do after the two of you, but I'll try to complement a little bit. I think what we're doing from a paramedic side is learning the key measurement that can actually impact fatigue and operational stress injury. And I think if you look at the domain that Marcus was talking, like from a physical or cognitive or emotional stressor, if we start to learn what is impacting from a paramedic lens, a lot of that will be transferable from other field. Maybe it's more physical, or maybe it's more cognitive or emotional, but these elements will repeat from one sector to the other. And after that, if we actually look at how do we operationalize the information we're able to collect and be able to actually target the impact, or how do you actually make an intervention live so you can actually prevent some injury. So that's what we're looking at in terms of if you get not a key data that you inform when a person is out of measurement, and you can actually make the intervention, I'm pretty sure we can reduce the amount of operational injury. And just to look at from a paramedic side, from a retirement perspective, we have about 10% of our workforce that actually retired, and a lot of that is regarding of the stress and the burnout and the anxiety and all that line of sight that we need to do better at.
Okay, so building off of that, you're talking, that's a fairly high number of people who, you're dealing with that, and even going into your retirement. So we know that within these various PSP sectors, shift work and long shifts are kind of an inevitable part of the occupation. Are there ways that the duration of the shifts and the impacts of the shift can be minimized within the field. And I'll open that up. Maybe Matt or Mike, if you want to speak to that, that would be wonderful.
I can maybe start because Mike is probably way more information in that regard to me. So I'll start. I think from an operational standpoint, we look at, in our standard that we have developed like a different factor of shift work. And we also have an operational lens that we need to have permanent working certain amount of hours to be able to cover the rotation. And I think like the shift and the duration is something that we can modify from an operational standpoint, but you have also multi different factors that also impact the fatigue and the stress of the individual, and both personal and professional. And I think we need to look at all the different areas, not just singular like the shift work in itself, because that's only one factor of multiple different domain there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Matthew's saying. There is nothing simple about fatigue. It's a very complex subject. There's multiple variables that are going to affect it, both from the work perspective to the personal physiological perspective to sleep factors. I mean, there's all kinds of contributing factors here. So when we look at schedules, first off, shift work is inevitable. We have a duty to provide 24/7 services, so we have to work within the confines of recognizing that right off the bat. But when it comes to schedule design, this is where we've had a lot of challenges. Now, in the past, a lot of prescriptive rules came out that said, you can only work X amount of hours and then maybe have X amount of time off, although there wasn't always as much reference to how much time off you should have. It was always about how many hours can you work. Now, we've slowly progressed away from that prescriptive language, thankfully, because it's not just about sleep. It's not just about the amount of hours that you're awake or the amount of hours you're putting in. It's also about timing. That circadian factor has been ignored in so much research that has been applied in industry. It's not ignored in the scientific community, but it hasn't been well translated into the operational format. So when we talk about fatigue, it is not just about sleep issues. It's also about the circadian impact and the long-term health consequences that we're seeing evolve within this field. And so when it comes to schedule design, we have to acknowledge that the timing of the schedule, when you start, when you finish, all have big roles to play, in addition to just the length of a shift or how many days in a row you work. Now, from a circadian impact, we also have to look at the rotation of a shift. Is it a rotating shift? Is it a permanent shift? So there is no ideal, perfect shift schedule out there. And I get that question a lot. Just tell us what schedule we should work and we'll make them do it. That's not how it works. You have to understand the context of operations. You have to understand the nuances of those operations to make sure that what kind of schedule you're putting in place supports the work that has to be done without at the same time putting individuals in harm's way. Those are always at crosshairs with each other. So one of the things we need to do is to examine our jobs, examine the tasks that are most commonly being done, and look at those tasks for what are the most likely errors that occur or the challenges that occur during that time frame. And if we can start to identify those and start to look at it from the lens of fatigue and recognize how much more risk is attached to those situations, then we can start to fatigue-proof and error-proof against those situations unfolding, because we're never going to eradicate fatigue. There's always going to be a baby that keeps somebody awake. So we have to recognize work has to be done in the context that we're going to have fatigued employees on site. How can we best manage that? Schedules are a big part of that, but they have to be developed in the context of the operations to make sense.
So further expanding on that then, because like you said, shift works, it's an inevitability. We can't really get away from it.
Wait, Kimberly, can I just interrupt you for one moment? Sorry, Mark there had something to contribute as well. I just want to make sure you're
I'm
heard.
going to take a further step back from what everybody's saying, because as a therapist, one of the things that I've seen over and over again is units that become burnout factors. So my argument always is that you can't think of mental health as just an individual sport. It's a team sport. It's an organizational sport. And until you tie fatigue to organizational realities, in other words, very directly, fatigue needs to be tied to staffing. For instance, in the paramedic world in BC, one of the big problems is, well, we've got nobody on the car tonight. So we've got to have somebody on tonight. So somebody volunteers, and so we create environments where people who are highly duty bound feel guilty about looking after themselves. So I think fatigue also needs to be looked at from a staffing point of view, because no matter what we try to do with the individual, that can always be usurped by the organization.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me then into the discussion about workload and work demands, because obviously those are things that additionally contribute. Can you speak to the importance of those factors on the development of fatigue? And we'll open it up, whoever wants to contribute here.
Perhaps to Mark's point and to Mike's point, everything could be related to workload and demands. So shift schedules, personnel, staffing, they're all related to the work demands that one might experience on the job. I think we at the Institute here, we conducted a longitudinal study just using antigraphy, something simple that we can collect in the field of paramedics in urban and rural services here in Ontario. And we were able at least to quantify some of that work demands based on call volume, call complexity, transfer call times, etc. And this was based on their ambulance call reports. We created the intervention demand matrix, which is based on self-report of expert raters. And we assigned the physical, mental, and frustration-related demands, respectively, to the ACR data. And we can do this retrospectively in our large data set. And to Mike's point, yes, absolutely. Circadian timing, everything should also be considered. So we also identified personal factors and how that might be confounding, or how that might impact some of the relationships between the main factors and sleep-related fatigue outcomes. So this includes their chronotype, their BMI, age, sex and gender, their age, etc. So I think in our previous presentation, we start discussing some of the potential relationships that emerged in that study. And we did identify a few associations between factors that were grouped as workload, work arrangement, and personal factors with sleep-related fatigue, which we defined based on metrics recorded by actigraphy with known threshold values. And more recently, we've been looking at the multivariable logistic regression models. And what we found when we were able to consider all those factors and adjust it for the personal factors, that there was interesting associations with physical and mentally demanding calls, and which demonstrated significant associations with adverse sleep-related fatigue. So it's not, as we indicated here, not just about shift schedules, but it's also what paramedics are exposed to in the workplace. So
A lot of factors for sure.
the human factors aspect, and yes, it's about the systems, looking at not just the person itself, but also the system around it, right? And this, we did find some interesting relationships even with the call volume, and this is kind of reminiscent of what we found even on the physical fatigue side of things, where there's this interesting U-shaped relationship when it comes to workload and fatigue. So it's not necessarily linear. So I think that is a consideration that we have yet to really think about when discussing fatigue amongst work populations. And it's something that's slowly emerging in the research realm, trying to understand the potential U-shaped relationship between workload and fatigue. So, but again, we did find that physical fatigue or physical demands were highly associated with adverse sleep outcomes. And going back to the double whammy of everything in terms of how fatigue may be identified or defined in any particular work population, I think we mentioned that the same factors related to physical fatigue, which are those physically demanding tasks, they may also have a potential effect on other forms and types of fatigue as well. So it has that double whammy aspect in which we might have to view in a bit more on how we can best reduce the physical demands or optimize the physical demands of a workplace so that we can not only address issues related to physical fatigue, but also other types of fatigue as we identified before. Yeah, and just want to add to this is that, you know, in our previous studies also looked into some of these factors that will lead to performance and quality deficits when it comes to more of an organizational factors, and we see that there's some similarities on those factors that they drive performance and quality deficits, as well as in terms of the operation side, in terms of those that they would impact the well-being and health and safety of the workers. So again, what is important, I just want to highlight again, is that yes, the shift, work has shifted schedule and type of shift and duration of the shift is important, but also what is being done during that shift and the complexity of the tasks on both the physical and cognitive aspect becomes essential. Unfortunately, we do not know much about that. Well, we know, but that is not done through that research. So we're trying to kind of really see how we can objectively quantify that, and then be able to kind of create some predictive models in which we'll be able to kind of identify those challenging situations that may impact both the well-being as well as the operational efficiencies.
If I could kind of close the loop on this, because I think it's kind of important, and I really want to highlight what Mark was saying, the organizational responsibilities. Fatigue is a shared responsibility. Unfortunately, we often use the term fatigue management and we forget about fatigue risk management, which puts the onus more on the organization. And the organization is responsible for proper schedule designs, workloads, work environment, and work culture. Those are their responsibilities. And when we think about fit for work, we often miss that that's only half of the circle. We have to have work that fits. So we cannot keep treating our first responders as these superheroes that don't have limitations. They have limitations, they're human. And if we don't close that loop, then the organization is letting down the most important people we have to support our society.
And now I want to return the favor, Mike, and build off of what you said. I love what you said, that we can't get rid of fatigue. So there's a flip side. How well can we bear it? In 2017, Harvard presented at the ISTE conference in Chicago, and they found that unit cohesion in the military was a negative predictor of PTSD by 20% variance. In other words, if you had a tight-knit unit, if you had good morale, this reduced your risk of PTSD by 20%. And for me, that was when the penny really dropped as the way I look at how we do this. That I'm going to go back to what I said before. It's not just an individual sport, it's a team sport. Mental health can't be bought. It can only be developed in culture, right? And so we know that, for instance, with police particularly, and with paramedics particularly, more and more so because of the lack of services, they are not supported by society. And that, just the lack of support by society, increases their risk. And so it makes them more vulnerable rather than more resilient. Whereas firefighters tend to have much more support socially. So that's a plus side on the resiliency. So again, we need to look at this more holistic as well.
So that brings us to one of the audience questions, which was, when we talk about burnout factories, what are some interventions perhaps that organizations could implement to kind of mitigate some of the risk factors for burnout?
Yeah, I can jump on that one. I think the work we're doing with Emin and Marcus from a public lens is, and Marcus touched a little bit on it, is if we can identify what's the impact on different skill or intervention we do, and what's the risk from fatigue or stressor, And this is what we're working on, is building somewhat of dashboard to be able to, have a look at what's the overall fatigue that you accumulated during a shift, with your shift duration, your overtime, your skill or intervention that you actually accomplished during it, and actually have somebody who has to keep an eye on it, so you can actually do an intervention within the shift instead of waiting like a couple of weeks, say, oh, your staff is burned out or fatigued and now are reactive to this consequence that happened during multiple shifts in a row. So if we can be a little bit more proactive around these action and intervention, I think we can do a lot of great work in that regard.
And I think there's a real call for doing it when they first come on board. That's what we're missing, is we're letting them get to the point where they're already burnt out and now we're trying to fix them. Let's set up the right strategies from the very set, that when they first step on board. So your onboarding, your orientation, they should be learning about sleep. They should be learning about the fatigue consequences. They should be developing strategies for those new recruits so that they can ingrain proper habits to help build and maintain their emotional tolerances, because there's nothing more important than sleep to repair the emotional centers of the brain. So if we don't give them those strategies up front as a preventative measure, then we're always going to be chasing the tail. And that's hard. Once you get into that loop of stress feeding into fatigue and fatigue feeding back into stress, how do you get out of that loop? How do you get sleep in there at all? So we really need to start right up front.
Right.
We just developed a program. I worked with Delta and developed a program that I call Use of Force for the Mind. And it's one of the problems with first responder agencies, I find, is that they use mental health. It's not training. It's off the side. It's sort of a one seminar here, and you can go to it if you want. And in the police world, that would be crazy. Like, here's a gun, shoot it a couple times, and now you're good to go. So Delta had the courage to go, because it's going to cost a lot of money. Well, we've already launched it, so it has cost a lot of money. But it's a 5-year program, complete with a workbook that they're expected to do. We're going to backlog it with podcasts and whatnot. So I presented to over 150 members over 6 days, 1 full day training for about 30 members each. And that's what needs to happen. It needs mental health and the training, exactly what Mike is saying. We need to give them tools. We need to treat it like an essential plan. And everybody's going to go, well, that's going to cost money. But if you look at it, it's going to save money, because down the road, if they have the tools to know that they're getting in trouble earlier than later, you can intervene earlier and get them back to in a good place much quicker. It's sort of like a cancer diagnosis. Earlier is better. You want the people to be aware and get on it.
And I know even if you do education, after the fact, you've been on the job for many, many years, there's still a positive impact. We just did a follow-up assessment at, not within the first responder world, but in regard to following up with this huge smeltering site. And we asked the employees, after they had received education, what kind of impact it had on them. And over 80% of them that had taken the training indicated they had made at least 3.5 substantial lifestyle changes as a result of that education. So it was everything from getting off of non-prescription medications to help with their sleep, to sharing information with their family, to changing their sleep environment. So very substantial changes just by giving them the proper scientifically vetted information.
Mm-hmm. Kind of building onto the strategies piece, because there's so many questions and there's so much stuff that we can discuss. And just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have questions, please pop them into the Q&A. We'll try to get to them. But I do have a question for Dr. Samuels. Just, can you speak to what are some of the evidence-based strategies that our PSP, our audience members who are watching today, what can they do to help manage fatigue and sleep issues within their own lives? And Mike has spoke about a little bit, but can you expand on that for us?
Yeah, sure. I just want to start by saying I'm ready to retire after listening to everybody. I started doing this in 1997, and listening to everyone is fascinating to me because, you know, it's the same conversation over and over, but it's wonderful to see that there is some structure to the research, and Mike is a content expert that's doing this work all over, and that's wonderful. And she'll probably have far better answers than I. I look at this so I'm a physician with an expertise in dealing with the consequences of what we are all just calling fatigue, which is far more complex than that. And as time goes on in the sleep research area and the neurobiology, we begin to understand that sleep actually is not the really big factor, in my view anyway. And so that's fascinating to learn. It was intuitively something that I thought when I started my career in medicine, doing on call, you know, continuous call for 36 hours and being expected to, you know, work and then drive home. And I've had, you know, a number of car accidents as a result of falling asleep at the wheel and whatnot, which actually got me interested in all of this. So when you ask, well, what can you do? You know, my first attempt was to work in healthcare, and this would have been around 2000 with the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And that, you know, basically died. There was literally no interest in healthcare in the province of Alberta. So I started working with the Calgary Police Service, and from the work there went to the RCMP. And if you ask me, in 2015, we created a online 6-module program for 20,000 police officers, but it has taken 10 years to get it through the massive bureaucracy of the RCMP to launch it in both French and English, and then test it. So we have one test. The pilot test was what got us going. But the point of so there is this paper that all of the panel members are aware of that I was part of writing in 2021. And we met, 20 of us met from around the world in Chicago for 3 days to write a paper called The Guiding Principles for Determining Shift Work Duration and Addressing the Effects of Shift Work Duration on Performance, Safety, and Health. And so this is sort of the core document for industry to use to address everything that everyone has talked about today. And it breaks it all down. The thing that the lens that I took was through education. Exactly what you are saying. And, you know, I mean, I could go on and on and on. But the bottom line for me was, if I was approached in 1990 by a chief of police saying, what's the shift? And Mike will hear this every time she gives a talk, I will respond to you, don't think about the shift because it ain't going to work. And you know, Mike is very much more pleasant than I am. She's a nice person, and, you know, she's not a physician. So we tend to be quite blunt. And it's like, let's forget about the shift because you're not going to do anything that I think is right anyway. Let's focus on helping these people tolerate shift work or prolonged work hours if it's physicians and healthcare and whatnot, okay? Or the combination of the two. And so it's really, from my point of view, your best effort is to go through a comprehensive education, either at the beginning of the career, in the middle of the career, because it depends. In law enforcement, we would argue, don't do it in training, you know, at the training camp school, right? Or in Regina at Depot. Don't do it there. Wait for the members to get 5 years under their belt. They're young, they can tolerate it, and then start educating them so they go, oh, I get it. Because they ain't going to get it when they're 22 years old. Same in healthcare. We wouldn't do this in medical school. We really, you know, we might do a little bit in residency. I do a lot with surgical residencies and anesthesia. But we want them to get into practice and go, holy crap, I got to look after myself. And so now, with that educational tool, we can, one, identify people that have sleep disorders. So in fatigue risk management internationally, this has been completely ignored. What portion of these population actually have a sleep disorder that's undermining everything, leading them to mental health, undermining the treatment of their PTSD, blah, 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 blah. So that they just need treatment. They need to see a doctor and get help. So Hans van Dongen from Washington State University is having me on a panel of all these experts that are talking at the research level, like you guys, but they want to know, okay, well, we're not actually talking about the guys that need help. We're just talking about systems changes, and which I'm totally into, but we're not identifying people who are ill. And there's at least 30% of the shift work population have a definable illness, mental health, medical health, sleep disorder that is affecting their tolerance of shift work, that if we fixed, brings them up to a much more resilient, tolerable level. So to me, the simple beginning step is actually acknowledge the systems issues, because that's a lot of work, but get an educational program going just for awareness. And then have people behind that program that can find the ill people and get them help. So we funnel the RCMP. They come from all over the country. They come here. They're identified, oh, this guy needs help. And boom, occupational stress injury clinic. It's like a pipeline of members with PTSD and Canadian Armed Forces members with PTSD, fix their sleep disorder. So, that's to me what's worked to get individuals better and back to work. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to expand on that? I do think it definitely sounds, education and being informed is probably one of our best strategies for prevention. When we start to see symptoms, what can families do? What kinds of things should they be watching for in their loved ones to maybe suggest to them, I noticed you're experiencing some fatigue and some symptoms of burnout. Here's a direction that you can head. Do you have any suggestions on that front?
I'd like to use an analogy because this is a really important part that often gets overlooked. I'm a scuba diver and I wear a computer, and the computer tells me how deep I am, really, which it tells me how much pressure I'm under for how long. And the point of the computer is to tell me that I shouldn't stay too long under that pressure because it can change my blood chemistry and put me in danger. That's a perfect model for what happens with stress and fatigue. As a diver, you don't typically, unless you're a really good diver, you don't really know how deep you are. It doesn't feel any different at 80 feet than it does at 30 feet. It feels the same because you just habituate. So you don't go, oh, I feel like I'm under all this stress. And I think that's one of the big problems that we have with interventions, is that we're relying on a lot of self-awareness. And the problem is with fatigue compromises self-awareness. So you just start diving and going deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're not even aware, and you're not aware of how long it is. So a team approach is essential. Information is good. I think that, for instance, as an experienced diver, you can notice that the colors are changing. And so oh, I'm getting deeper. But that's only an experienced diver. So you can give people some help, but their ability to use that help to measure their fatigue is kind of limited. So I'm a big proponent of objective testing, that they take objective testing. They don't have to, they just simply take it and are their own monitors. And then building a team of close associates and close people at home to look for the most common types of characteristics: isolation, loss of interest and pleasure, self-medication, things like that. But it's really, they need a team. If we leave it up to their own insight, the very nature of fatigue compromises their insight. So they go deeper and deeper and they're not even aware of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point to build on, because especially when we're talking about shift work operations, there's long been this fallacy that we will adapt to night shift. The truth of the matter is we are a diurnal species. We do not adapt to becoming a nocturnal species. Science hasn't figured out how to change our species yet. The reality is, while some of the rhythms in our body will begin to adapt to a change in schedule, not all of them do. And the biggest one that we're most concerned about is the digestive rhythms. They do not adapt to going onto a night shift, and that has a huge component on our overall health status. So what we actually know to be true is that, to Mark's point, that we are very bad at self-assessing our own levels. When we look at the research, and Van Dongen has done some wonderful research in this area, correlating how people subjectively measure their fatigue impairment levels versus objective data, and you will consistently see that after the first or second night that they're on an unusual schedule or rotated onto a night shift, they will first feel that, you know, they're more tired, but then after that, every subsequent night they work, even though there are increases in every performance decrement possible, they have baseline. They all think, oh, I'm doing fine now, I've adapted. And yet when you look at the objective data, they're making more and more errors and mistakes, and it's graduating with every night that they work. So they haven't adapted to night shift. They've adapted to a state of impairment, and that has become their new normal for that time frame. So we have to recognize that this old fallacy that, oh, if you work X number of days, you will adapt to night shift. That's not really true. It's not borne out in any of the evidence that's out there. In fact, all of the evidence, when you even look at permanent night shifts, less than 3% show adaptation to working in night shift, even when they're on a permanent schedule. So that's, again, part of the education that we need to bring.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more of my questions, and then we'll try to get to some of these audience questions. But one of the things that I've noticed working in mental health is communication is often a huge barrier. We have trouble communicating our own needs. Family sometimes has trouble communicating to our loved ones that we're recognizing a problem. Do you have suggestions for how PSP can effectively communicate with their own teams that they need support for their fatigue and for their burnout, or that family can also use to communicate back to their PSP? Dr. Samuels, you have your hand up.
So I think there are two things that I just want to mention. One is the family. The other is the life cycle of a worker. So there are things that we can do and implement when someone enters into EMS, you know, starting their career and transitions through. We know how long people last in law enforcement now and EMS, et cetera, and they aren't long periods of time because they're difficult jobs. But one of the things that we could discuss with agencies more aggressively is, could we not look at, as a person transitions into their 40s after, you know, 15, 20 years, could we change? Do we have the capacity with staffing to workload? Do we have the capacity to move a 45-year-old into day work, evening work, as opposed to night work? You know, so the life cycle of the worker and the family. And so in Calgary, we actually, alongside implementing the fatigue management training program for patrol officers, we had a family program. And the education for the family was totally different than for the worker. And it focused on educating people who have no clue. My wife slept right next to me my entire career while I was on call and had no idea what I was doing at 2 o'clock in the morning. She didn't know what, and she was my wife. You know, so people just don't know what it is to do that work. And if you educate them and they understand, they immediately go, oh, well, that's why dad's so grumpy or mom's so grumpy or whatever. And then you can start that conversation, because they don't converse. I have them in the office every day. You know, fix my husband, fix my wife. And so if we can get them just talking and communicating through just simple educational interventions and acknowledgement of the difficulty of the work, this ain't a regular job.
And we have to recognize the family is that critical support system that they need.
Huge.
Right? They can't support the workers if they don't understand what they're going through. And if the worker doesn't know what they're going through, you're at a loss. So yeah, a very important point.
Yeah. So a lot of the questions that we're getting from audience members really do come back to those: where do I go? What do I do? I'm starting to recognize that maybe this is a problem, or I want to prevent this problem. What are some of your recommendations in terms of services, places that they can really actively seek out to get the support that they need?
So this probably isn't going to be specific enough for people, but as a therapist, the very first thing I do is psychoeducation. I want people, because what people do is they feel out of control and they feel helpless, which makes more stress. And so I will frequently tell my clients that by the end of therapy, you should know more about PTSD or anxiety or whatever than I do. Like, I really want you to know this stuff, because then they have a mastery over it. So the first thing I would say to anybody who's lost, because getting psychological service and getting good quality psychology is a challenge. It is a challenge. And most aren't informed consumers. They don't know what good therapy is or what bad therapy is. And there's a lot of bad therapy out there. There's a lot of bad help out there. There's a lot of charlatanism. So workbooks, I think it would be wonderful. One of the things we're working on at Delta is to produce a set of resources that we think are really good quality resources that people can begin to access themselves. And I think if we could have that kind of standard across Canada, where these are really good quality books, this is what you should look at, these are good quality workbooks, these are good quality seminars, that at least begins the person in the right direction. And then they kind of have a clearer, first of all, they feel more in control, less stress, it has a positive impact. And then they have a clearer impact of what good help can look like.
Thank you.
And
Dr. Yazdani?
Yeah, I think I like the discussion and the direction we're taking. And I think what we have seen being very effective is providing, job-specific, task-specific examples and scenarios to help individuals fully understand what we're talking about. We have seen that as a huge advantage when you're looking at very specific issues that could potentially be as a result of the job and the tasks and duties that each of these occupations might need to perform. So the context becomes very important. And if it's just about kind of providing training without providing that contextual information, I think we're going to lose interest, to be honest, and the effectiveness of that will be significantly impacted. So I like really how Mark kind of laid out that as providing maybe a battery of resources that could potentially enhance and improve that training, and they're evidence informed. So it's not that every training is as effective and every training or every content is useful. I think it has to be some sort of a process in which that information is vetted and that those resources are evidence informed, but again with some additional context and examples that would be directly related to the job and the duties of those individuals.
Thank you. Dr. Samuels?
For those, or if there are people actually wanting to know where to get help, as opposed to an organization, what they should do to provide help, my response to that is, if you are struggling with your sleep and you think that struggle is affecting your daytime performance, if you are falling asleep or inattentive driving to or from work, you need to go see your primary care provider immediately, because there is help. What we find, especially in law enforcement, they just didn't know they could get help. They just thought, this is my lot in life, and that is not true. So, any primary care provider, just identify that you're struggling, and if they can't get you somewhere, they have a responsibility to help you. And that's critical, above and beyond what we should be doing within an industry to educate people.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I just kind of like to build on that, because this is the challenge that we're facing in industry, where if we identify employees that may have, concern for sleep disorder or something, they send them to their primary care physician. But the majority of those physicians are not well versed in understanding sleep issues. So what's happening is they are prescribing pills, medications, without them even having a proper diagnosis. So that's not always the best scenario. And they often will just start classifying them as, oh, well, you have shift work disorder. And now they go back to the company and say, I have shift work disorder.
Okay, well,
So-
wait, Mike, hold on, because we can't throw them all under the bus. Because you're 100% right. You are right. There's no question. And every step is right, because those people with the doctor's note come to my office. They're sent by the company to say, okay, can this person work or not? I'm sure Mark sees these too, but they need to go for help. So just to say, well, the doctor's just writing a script, I totally get it. And that is not the approach. But we will see anyone from around this country, and they're sent to us all the time, and we will see them as a first responder immediately, because there is no clinic like ours that focuses on this very issue with, 7 clinicians who are expert at dealing with shift workers. And we can direct them somewhere in Vancouver or wherever, Ottawa, to get long-term help, or just guide them. Just say, here's what you need to do. This is hugely helpful for the individual worker during this time where we're trying to figure all of this out, which will be a 50-year process.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing that I was trying to get to, is that we need to promote services like yourself and other clinical services that are well versed in this, that can actually help us and give that security that organizations are looking for, because right now there's this huge gap. There's a dearth of applicable services that are really supporting what's going on. So even just educating our primary care physicians might be a strategy that we as professionals have to look at.
Absolutely. And when you're developing fatigue risk management strategies, which Amin and Marcus are responsible for, that's their job along with Matthew, there has to be an end point. This leads to 1, identifying who needs help, 2, identifying who needs a doctor and get them there. So this is what we did with the national teams and the Olympic teams, is we created a system where if you identified an athlete that really needed help, we got them to help immediately. And that's across the country. And you need that kind of network to then finish end to end what you're doing in the fatigue risk management process.
Thank you. I don't want to cut anybody off. Unfortunately, Zoom will cut us off. So I do want to just stress that really important point of go for help and speak up if you see someone who you recognize as being, affected and facing this challenge, and maybe just encourage them to go get the support that they need as well, and the help that they need as well. There's so many more questions we could ask and so much more we could talk about. As Dr. Samuels mentioned, this is a long-standing issue that doesn't make tons of headway, but we're getting there. Hopefully everyone can take away some really great points from today. And I really want to stress that we really, really appreciate having all of you here today with your expertise and your insights. It's incredibly important and invaluable for our attendees. Again, thank you to the audience for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody today. An hour feels so rushed when there's so much good stuff to talk about. We do have another webinar coming up, and that slide will come up on your screen here right away. It's on April 9th, and it's hosted by the Garnet families. It's an interactive series. It's from Dr. Heidi Cram and Dr. Deborah Norris, and it will be a conversation about the experiences and perspectives of families not commonly represented, including single parent serving families and dual serving families. So you can check out the link on your screen for more information. And I think there will be a link in the chat as well. Our email address is up here. I encourage you to reach out and ask more questions. We can put you in touch. We can try to answer as many questions via email as possible. Let us know if there's other topics that you would like to see, other presenters that you would like to have as host, because these conversations are fantastic. And I think they go a long way to helping everyone out. And that is all from us today. Our team here at Support, thank you for your attendance and your participation. I think that is everything. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day. Hopefully winter doesn't hit too hard.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
It was a great panel to be a part of. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for that.